Today I wanted to talk about some of the tools we make for ourselves, especially when we just have to make it what I like to call quick and dirty. We don't have to worry about data validation because if the data isn't valid, the application gives us what for a user might be weird error messages, but as developers we don't care if we understand the message. We can just react accordingly. We don't have to spend time on prettifying it. Um, Sometimes and as I said in the mail, sometimes we create tools for ourselves that are basically one-time use tools. They're not really applications. They're just bits of code we use to accomplish a specific purpose. One of those tools I talked about was um, running a comparison between requirements of one tender specification and another tender specification. In our case, we had a tender specification for a project, and then a while later that project was extended with a different, with another section that had to be added to the original section. So it's a railway metro line, and they reused most of the tender requirements, but with some modifications. And after a while, someone wanted to know, okay, so where are the two tender requirements? Where do they differ? So I made some code that would compare the requirements for each document. You can see we have here maybe 10, 15 documents that are being compared. Out here, it lists how many changes are for each document. And if we go look at here we have a list of things that have changed. So for a specific requirement ID in the codes and standards document, this is a rich text field of access, and the word main was deleted. The word Civil-Works North, Civil-Works South, TS was deleted, and these words were added. This is a 118-page report, and let's see how long time it takes to create it. It's created, I think, when it opens. It's each of these tender requirements have tender specifications have just under 10,000 requirements, and all of this is being compared. I wrote this tool in, I don't know, a couple of hours maybe. Imagine some poor guy, student help maybe, being forced to sit and do a manual comparison of 10,000 records. You could do it some of it with something like a word merge, but if you have a big document, I mean, this report just gives what's actually changed. A word merge might give you the highlight, but it doesn't tell you that these are the 5 requirements that were changed. Okay, so that was just an example of writing tools. Just if there's any questions before I move on. Okay, so I'll move on to the other thing I wanted to demonstrate, a task listing application. Again, this is something I wrote in a couple of hours. Originally, I just had one tool I was supporting, and the feature requests were coming in steadily, and I just either keep track of it in memory or I'd have a little post-it, yellow post-it I'd put on the side of my screen. And I started supporting more and more applications, and sometimes I would have trouble. I had too many tasks. Some of them were easy to implement, like the kind you can implement while the user is actually there standing in front of you, and you can just go ahead, make that change. Other times it's more difficult. So I wanted to start by saying, okay, each task, each feature request has a priority between 1 and 10, and they have a difficulty or a time to implement And I just set that to be the same kind of time. Difficulty is the same slot. And that's, again, a number from 1 to 10, with 10 being very difficult to implement, 1 being easy to implement or not taking a lot of time. So pretty standard task table. Have a table of tasks, task name, task description, priority, time and difficulty, Boolean field indicating whether it's been completed or not. Some tasks are ongoing. I mean, they're not really being solved. There's something I have to do every week kind of thing. And a while later, I added a task requester. So who was actually was asking for this feature to be implemented, so I could revert to them if I had questions. And I have a table of applications. I have 4 main applications I'm maintaining. This all gets thrown into this main form, where we have a data sheet. And over here on the right-hand side, the application is plotting all of these numbers in. These are the task IDs. And if we go look the mouse over, the control tip text is actually the application name followed by the name of the task. So if I click any of these, it'll go focus on that record over here. You can see it jumping around as I click. Now, I found out recently that a datasheet can have subforms. I always knew they could have subforms, but I don't know where I got this idea. I thought that a datasheet subform had to be another datasheet. Turns out you can actually put subforms and subforms into those subforms of the datasheet. So you can expand here, and this is actually a subform that has the description of that task. And these actually come from the same table. So I can add a description to my task 20, save it by hitting save. If we go look at the table task for task 20, this is where I just added my description. So it comes from the same table. But I like that I don't have to show the description each time. I can show it on demand when I need to have the description. Some of these have a bit of description, some of them don't. But I like that I can hide it and don't have to take up screen real estate for it. I also have the ability to filter on my applications. If I just want to see tasks for one application. So let's take this task 8, ongoing data support. I should probably write some more description for that, but let's see what happens if I go and change the priority. Let's change it to a priority 1, and as I save it, note how it moves upwards. So this is now a more important task. If I change the time, it's going to take less time, so it moves over here on the left. Change it back. So my task listing here, if I change it to show all applications, it's basically a guideline saying, okay, if I start by looking at the top, these are the most important tasks. Looking at the top, moving down, I have the most important tasks. Looking on the left, going right, I have the most easiest tasks to implement. So, okay, this task 9, that has a time of 1. It should be very easy to implement. It's about, I have a drop-down list, and I should change the font of that drop-down to be a font that each character has the same amount of width, so that it looks, it doesn't look good right now the way it's filtered, or the way it looks when it drops down. It's hard to compare different different entries to each other, because the size of them changes. So I should change it to a monospaced font. So there was a question from Giorgio. What did you say? If I have to hit the plus sign to ascertain whether there's a description. Right now, I do have to, but I figure I could, I might be able to do something like include a query with, if the field is not null, have a small check mark. Something like that, I don't know. But usually it's not the description I'm looking for. I'll have the name, then I'll be like, if I need to remember what was this about, did I add a description for that? I could go look at the description. Now these are all something where, since it comes from the same table, it's actually the same record that is being shown in the subform. That means there'll always be there'll always be an entry for each record. I don't know if the record doesn't have a sub-record, if the plus sign would show. I don't actually know that. Play around with it, find out. So how do we do all this stuff over here on the right? How do we make the numbers move around? We go look at it in design view. There's actually no numbers. There's no numbers here. Down here, we have a lot of controls. Now these are all controls I just added. They're text boxes. I just copy pasted like, so Giorgio says, what do I mean by sub-record? By sub-record, basically I mean a record that's related to the main record, like the kind of record you'd put in a sub-form. Does that make sense? So in this case, the description is actually the same record as the record for the task, because it comes from the same table. This is not a query. This is a table, comes from the same table. So there's always going to be a record in the subform. You see, this is the form. All of this is datasheet form, so that's why it's not arranged nicely or anything. And it has the subform that shows the description. Subrecord is a record in a subform. Yeah, that's how it would usually be. Usually it would be a related record. In this case, it's actually not. Okay, I'm going to move on. So I added all these text boxes. Try to move it around. See, there's a lot of text boxes on top of each other. And right now they're all set with visibility false. And the only other thing I did with them is I added to all of them a on-click event. It says equal navigate to task. If we look at it, I also named them. So they have txt task display 1 through 42 is the last one. So if I make more than 42 records, I will run out of text boxes. But in that case, I can just go and add more text boxes. You could do it programmatically, but you won't be able to do that in an MDE or a compiled file. So that's why I'm sticking to, I add the records before saving the form. Or add text boxes before saving the form. So let's go check out the code. So at the module level, I have a collection of used tasks. As the form loads, I initialize the collection by setting it equal to a new collection. In the current event of the form, I draw the tasks. I'll show the code for that in a second. And I also have something to clear the task drawings. But let's go look at the draw tasks. This is the code for draw tasks. It starts by calling clear task drawings, which is basically going to loop through all of the things I've added to my collection of used tasks, return their visibility to false, and remove them from the collection. So I start by opening a record set of my tasks with a bit of SQL, pretty standard. The only thing I do here is that if the task is completed, don't include it. And if the combo box for application selection, that's the one up here, if I want to filter on what applications to show, if that is empty, don't add any more to the SQL string. If it's not empty, add a bit of where clause to that string so that we filter on the application ID. So I open up my record set and I loop through it. So I set a text box variable by getting the control. I get the control that's called txt task display and reference it by the absolute position of my record set plus 1. Because for the first record, the absolute position is 0. So if I have the absolute position, you can think of it like an index. It's easy to use if you need to know the position of the record in the record set. Or instead of having to add a counter, I'm guessing most of you have done something like this. And add in the loop, I equal I plus 1. But since we're looping through a record set, we might as well take advantage of that, keep the code simple, and use the absolute position. So I change the value of the text box to the task ID of my task. I set its visibility to be true, so we can see it. And then I move it around. I change the top value of a text box. I set it equal to the top value of the image. So that's the image here. So this image is something I created in, I think it was Word, actually. I just created it, copy-pasted it, inserted it. Nothing fancy there. And going from the top of my image, I then take the priority divided by 10 times the height. That's basically going to place the top from either here down to here, based on what priority the task is given. Then we do the same with the left value. We start at the left side of the image, increment by whether or not it's close to or from 1 to 10, moving from the left side to the right side by the difficulty of the task. So then I use that I can change the control tip text to be equal to the application name and hyphen and the task name. Finally, I have for each application a predefined color. So I changed the text box's color to match that of my application color. Now to keep track of which text boxes I've used, I added to a collection so I can clean it up easily afterwards. Another solution might be to loop through all of the controls, but in this case I just add them to the collection and I clean them from the collection when I'm done. Finally, I close down the record set. So we can see over here all of our tasks being added. If I go set a breakpoint here, Switch to design view and switch back. Now if we look at the form, it's not showing. I thought I could step through it, but I can't. Anyways, that's how all of these, I'm using the fact that I can assign those text boxes, move them around. I can even change control source, change value at runtime. And you can do all of this in an MDE just as long as you create the records or the controls before. Of course, you're limited to the amount of controls you can create, but I think I tested sometime that in Access 2010 you can create 700 controls. So I think you're good to go, and if you have more than 700 controls, well, you would have to just check for it, present a message box saying we can only show the first 700 records of your tasks. But if you have 700 tasks, I think you have bigger problems than this application. Okay. So what does the navigate to task do? That was the thing I added here, equal to navigate to task. So that's I can on the form has to be public, has to be a function, but on my form I can have a function that's being called by any text box. Now, how do I know which text box was clicked? I use the screen.activeControl.value to get the text box that was clicked, get the task ID. I just set focus to the subform and do a find first. So that's what takes care of navigating my form when I click over here. So I think that was pretty much it for this one. Any questions? Okay. So no questions. Oh, I've got a question from Giorgio about the compare example. What do I use to carry out the comparison? Do I use queries or VBA? I use both. Close this down. And let's see. Now, for comparing whether they're equal or not, I start by doing that comparison. And I do that by just saying if they're equal to each other, then there's no change. If they're not equal to each other, I want to run my code to compare them. This is code I wrote myself. You can find it at my blog. So what it does is it will take two text strings, compare them to each other, generate HTML markup in the way that Access wants it, Access rich text. So you can see this text compared to this text outputs this, and if you put that into a rich text control, it's going to be colored like this. See another example. This is a demo form that just shows the concept. Again, you can download it. This is just me playing. So if we write any text here, do a compare. So we could write any text we want. and add some more. Click the compare. You can see how it compares. So this is the function I used in my database to output to a report. The client wanted, in my demo, I used red and blue text for deleted and added text, but the client wanted the green highlight for added text. That's why that's what you see in the report. You can even some options by character, by word. You can see in this case, we're see if we compare by word, it's going to say that this word is not equal to this word and highlight it like so. If we change it to be by character, it's just going to show that the R was added. Sometimes you might want more visibility. This can be hard to spot. And of course, if you do it by word, it's faster than doing it by character. So if you're doing large text fields, we have an application that uses this on a 400-page document. And in that case, we do it by word. Otherwise, it would be not very slow, but it would be slow. I think in terms of performance, it runs for that 400-page. It runs that by less than 30 seconds. The thing is, this scales by the amount of words and scales by n squared. So add a word, you're scaling it by n squared. You can also switch it on whether or not it's case sensitive. So in this case, in this case, it's catching that James capital is not the same as James without capital J. In this case, it's not catching it. Again, this is downloadable from my website. It's also a test form. This is about requirements. That's what I usually end up handling, requirements. And even it has a history table, so we can see what's changed. These are all the records in this table. You can see we started in 2013 with the original text, and the hours were changed, and a bit of the wording were changed, and some more words were added to the requirement. If we go change it again, save it, click the history button. We now see that last time it was changed, the word "and a kosher meal" was added to the requirement. Any more questions? In the compare example, I'm comparing lots of records. Do I use a query to find out where the two don't match? You could do that, but the code, as I remember it, it's been a while since I looked into this. I think it starts by comparing the two strings. It says if the two strings are equal, then we're just going to encode it with standard standard HTML and exit. So we don't actually do all of the compare stuff. If we do all of the compare stuff, that's what's been going on down here. then it takes more time. Does that answer your question? Okay, so I don't have anything more for today, but next time I was hoping that I could convince some of you to take 10 minutes, show off some of your work, and I'm going to post about it soon. And I hope that some of you would be willing to show off what you've been doing, receive some comments, some feedback, and then we can use that as a basis for discussion or maybe follow-up demonstrations of various bits of code that interest you. So thank you all for coming today. Yes, the file I'm showing is available on my blog. You can just go ahead and download it. It's free of charge. Oh, and if anyone wants the task list file, drop me an email and I'll send it to you.